No
Okay,
nightclub last night.
I haven't met Dr. David Gurevich before, but I've been most impressed by our little conversation that we've had. He's not only a member of the Institute of Archaeology on the Hebrew University, but he is a guide, so of course we have communication, and he's done a lot of research on the Second Temple period, archaeological findings, the Second Temple period. And the most impressive thing is that he was a Fulbright scholar at Harvard. You can't get better than that.
Thanks.
So, David, it's up to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, after this kind introduction, I need to meet the expectations. So, everybody, welcome to Israel. I hope you're enjoying this few days that you already have been here, right? And I was asked by Professor Mishini that I understand that couldn't join you today, unfortunately, to prepare a short presentation about the Temple Mount, about the history, archaeology, more to speak about the ancient history, Jewish tradition, Muslim tradition, and also about the situation today, the thing that gets the news. Now, it was almost mission impossible because I was given 25 minutes for that, for all that, right? So we'll try, we'll see. At a certain point, I will probably stop the presentation. We'll manage to get to that end. Please, let's make sure that we keep the questions till the end, okay? And let's start, okay? Okay, please. So, the Temple Mount. You're tomorrow going to tour the Temple Mount, right? Yes. That's great. And you're probably going to be really impressed by the things you're going to see there. Really magnificent. My presentation is a bit more about things that you can't see, things that below the ground, things that we know from the research and so on. So, any of you have been to Rome? Right? So in Rome, when you get to the Roman Forum, a downtown of ancient Rome, at the way between the Colosseum and the Forum, you can see Triumphal Arch. Inside this Triumphal Arch, dedicated to Titus, the Roman emperor, or before that, Roman general who destroyed Jerusalem, there is a relief. This relief. These are Roman soldiers, and they are carrying to Rome, in the course of this triumphal procession, they are carrying the menorah. So I decided to start my presentation with this slide, because this is how the Jewish temple became remembered for thousands of years by the world. Jonas? We are talking about the Temple Mount. Okay. So the menorah was a candlebarium that was in the Jewish temple. It was very famous, and as you can see, its form or shape is quite, I would say, unusual, and that's why probably it was the most it was an artifact that was most associated with the temple. And later, of course, it became associated with the Jewish people. Now, this is year 70 of Common Era, when Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Please welcome. Yeah. Please. When Romans destroyed Jerusalem, in course of events that we call them the Great Revolt, or the First Jewish-Roman War. First, because there was also the second. So, the First Jewish-Roman War. Oh, wrong direction? Yeah. So, the Temple Mount. This is how the Temple Mount looks today when you stand in Mount of Olives. Have you already been there? Wonderful. So, you're standing in Mount of Olives, you're looking towards west, and what you see is the Temple Mount. Of course, immediately you can recognize the Dome of the Rock. massive construction. And it's not a mosque, it's a shrine. It's called Dome of the Rock because under it there is a rock. What kind of rock? We're going to talk about it in a second. And of course, the most important mosque in Jerusalem, soared in its, I would say, holiness in the world for the Muslims, Mosque of Al-Aqsa, this construction. By the way, for Muslims, they would consider as a mosque not only the construction itself, but also the open courtyard of the mosque. So basically, the whole Temple Mount is considered by Muslims as a mosque. Muslims have 3 holy sites important in the world. The most important is a city in Saudi Arabia called Mecca. Then we have a city called Medina, also in Saudi Arabia, and then Jerusalem. And the reason why Jerusalem is important is this mosque, Mosque of Al-Aqsa. Now, the courtyard and the walls, part of the walls, basically preserve construction of Jewish temple. So we don't have the temple itself, it was destroyed by the Romans. But the temple used to stand on a platform. And that platform is what you see here. Now, if you got a bit confused till now, let's make order in that timeline. So, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, we hear that Solomon built the first temple. That's how we have the first temple period. Solomon, son of David, David conquered Jerusalem, King David, very suitable, right? Then he had a son. His son was a very important king, according to the Bible. He built the first temple. And that temple was built on a place called the Temple Mount. What is the temple? Now, that temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, 586 before Common Era. You don't have to remember the dates, just to put you in context so you know the general timeline. Then, after 70 years, Jews come back to Jerusalem after the exile and rebuild the temple. That's how we have a new period called the Second Temple period. Now, they rebuilt a small temple because they had very modest resources. But then, in the first century, we have a big change. There was a king, a Jewish king appointed by Romans named Herod the Great. And as was his name, the Great, he basically put huge efforts in building projects. Of course, because he was Jewish, the most important project for him was the temple. So Herod decided to build the biggest sanctuary in the Roman world. Now, that was the end of the first century before Common Era. Now, he had one small problem. That problem was that the dimensions of the sanctuary that he wanted to create were much bigger than the physical space. So what did he do? Herod decided to create this platform. Basically, he created arches here. He created some extensions here. On them, he linked a platform. Also, he created retaining walls. And that's how we have the Temple Mount that exists today. So when you today go to the Western Wall, to the Kotel, what you would see is Herodian wall. That wall was built by Herod and people who continued his work in order to create this big shoebox that was put on the bedrock. So somewhere here below we have the bedrock. Because Herod wanted to make it bigger, he created this big box made out of stone, and that's what you see today, right? On the top, we had the temple. And the temple was so magnificent that the rabbi said, one who hasn't seen the temple built by Herod hasn't seen a beautiful building in his life. So try to imagine that this was the biggest temple, the biggest sanctuary, more correctly. It was not only the temple building, but the whole complex in the Roman Empire. It was very famous. People came here for pilgrimage from all around the Roman Empire, from Babylon, from Egypt. And the temple was basically the heart of the Jewish nation. Unfortunately, it all ended the year 70 of Common Era. Remember, one slide before that, the Ark of Titus in Rome. Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and from that time, there is no temple. The next big change, and because I don't have enough time to elaborate everything, I'm just running forward, the next big change that you can see today is basically the construction of the Muslim shrines and the mosque. So basically we have the platform, the same platform that Herod created. It was a bit renovated. And then on the top we have the Muslim construction. We have Dome of the Rock and we have the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And if we look on the Old City today, you can see that the Temple Mount is about 1/6 of the territory of the Old City. Right? Till now, you're with me? Thank you. By the way, this is from National Geographic. So, if you would like to have this image, please just check your library, search for National Geographic, and you'll get it. All right. I'm going back to Jerusalem at the end of the Second Temple period, just basically before Romans destroyed it. This is the Temple Mount. This is the temple somewhere here on the Temple Mount, probably on the most highest location, where today stands Dome of the Rock. You can see that the city was quite big. Now, please compare. Do you see this line? This is the wall of the Old City today, which is a Turkish wall. In our scale in Israel, it's like yesterday, 500 years. 500 years old only. This year, this town, this city was 2,000 years old, right? So it was destroyed by Romans. And you can see that Temple Mount was the focus of the city. Everything was connected to the Temple Mount. Now try to imagine the situation. Let's say that we don't really know how many people lived in Jerusalem at that time, but we can assume that it was about 30,000 people. But 3 times a year, during the holidays of pilgrimage, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot, Jewish holidays of pilgrimage, many pilgrims came here in order to attend the ceremonies in the temple. So try to imagine that the population of Jerusalem doubled or tripled during these holidays. And that's how Jerusalem basically lived from pilgrimage. People come on pilgrimage, they buy sacrifices, they buy food. A lot of money is brought to the city. Also, each pilgrim would bring a half shekel coin to the temple in order to contribute to maintaining the worshipping. And what we know archaeologically, that a lot of facilities in the city were connected to pilgrimage. Now, I point right now on a line. This line is basically the main street of Jerusalem. Like, now, if you speak about New York, so this is the Broadway. And if you would like to get to the Times Square of Jerusalem at that time, 42, that would be here, in this area. just near the Temple Mount. Basically, each pilgrim would come here. Before he would go to the Temple Mount, he would have to purify himself. He would have to attend a mikveh, a ritual bath. He would have to purchase a sacrifice. He would have to change money in order to donate the coin, the half shekel, and try to imagine that everybody had to do it, let's say, in the course of a few hours. So that would be an amazing sight. Just to imagine that you would be standing on the streets of Jerusalem and you would hear so many languages: Greek, Latin, different languages from Mesopotamia, languages from Africa. And we have it documented, by the way, in historical sources. For instance, here in the New Testament, right, that there were people from different countries coming to Jerusalem. Remember, there is a man named Simon of Cyrene. So he came from North Africa. If you remember in Pentecost, right, there are people speaking different languages. It's all these descriptions meet the same background of Jerusalem, of Jerusalem as a pilgrimage city. By the way, remember also in the New Testament there was a description of Jesus having a dispute with money changers, right? Also connected to the pilgrimage. If you happen to visit the Israel Museum, right? You already went. Wonderful, wonderful. So did you see this model?
Yes.
So this is how Jerusalem looked like just before Rome was destroyed. This is the temple. Try to see how big it was, and of course, try to imagine that this was the most magnificent city in the whole region. Of course, that was something that would create a lot of potential. Now, I would like to touch very quickly the Jewish perception of the Temple Mount. In Mishnah, Mishnah is a Jewish oral law. We have the Torah, right, the written law. We have Mishnah, which is the interpretations of the rabbis of the Torah. Then we have Talmud, which is interpretations of interpretations, and so on, so on, so on. But in Mishnah we have interpretations that date back, most of them, or many of them, to the Second Temple period, or shortly after it. In other words, as scholars, when we study the text, we can assume that it represents certain perception that developed, religious perception, that developed in the time that the temple existed. So, what it says is that in Judaism, we have 10 degrees of holiness in the world. The land of Israel is more holy than other nations, other countries. The cities that are walled, that have wall in the land of Israel, are more holy than other cities. In Jerusalem, the area within the wall is the holy things of minor degree and second maybe eaten, and so on. So when you get to each circle like that of holiness, you have different decrees that you have to do, or you should do, or you cannot do. Now, what is interesting, that here we are, we start with the Temple Mount. Inside Jerusalem, the most holy place is the Temple Mount. For neither Zav or Zava, people who are sick of different sexual diseases, should not enter. Also, no women after childbirth, because they're considered as impure. So, the perception of holiness is connected also to who can enter or who can't enter. Then inside the Temple Mount, we also have different areas. We have the rampart, which is more holy. So, who is not the person who is not Jewish, or person who is pagan, he cannot enter inside. the court of the women, the court of the Israelites, all these places inside the Temple Mount, inside the temple. And then the most important place is the Holy of Holies, inside the temple, for only the high priest on the day of atonement at the service may enter. So one day during Yom Kippur, very, very soon, the high priest would be allowed to enter inside and have a short service there to ask God to forgive the sins of his nation, and he will have to go out very quickly, because if the sins are not forgiven, that's how the tradition says, he will fall dead inside. By the way, because only the high priest could enter inside, they would put a string around his body, so if something happens to him, they will be able to take him out. Now, today we don't know where is the Holy of Holies. According to the tradition, it is connected to the rock. Remember the Dome of the Rock? So, according to tradition, Holy of Holies was where the rock is today. Now, the rock in the Jewish tradition is considered as the foundation stone. Basically, the first stone or the first rock that God created when he created the universe. Then Abraham brought his son Isaac to sacrifice and was stopped by God. And according to tradition, it also happened there. During the first temple, on that rock, in Holy of Holies, was the Ark of the Covenant. In the second temple, it was an empty room. And the high priest would enter there, only the high priest. Of course, Romans were very amazed by this thing, how it can be that in the temple, the most holy place, there is nothing. And we have descriptions in Josephus that different Roman generals attempt to enter there. So, if I recreate or try to put the boundaries, we can't see them today, that would look something like that. We have different circles inside the Temple Mount, where the most holy place is here. This is the temple itself, right? And the Holy of Holies is the west side of the temple. By the way, when people come today to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, and they stand in front of the Kotel and they pray in front of the Kotel. Some of them will see put their head not directed to the Kotel, not directed to the wall, but a bit in diagonal, because it will point to the Holy of Holies. Whenever a Jew is, he would pray into direction. He would face land of Israel during the service. If he is in land of Israel, he would look to Jerusalem. If he is in Jerusalem, he would look towards the Temple Mount, and he is on the Temple Mount or near the Kotel, he would look towards the Holy of Holies. So, what we do have archaeologically. I'm archaeologist, by the way. The answer, unfortunately, is not a lot. And the reason is not connected to archaeology, but much more with politics and religious sensitivity. Unfortunately, there were no, I would say, big-scale excavations ever held in the Temple Mount. Why? Well, try to imagine that somebody would only propose making an excavation at Temple Mount. Immediately you have billiards of people on the streets, Muslims, Jews protesting against it. Impossible, mission impossible, right? So what do we have? We have data from the 19th century, when a few British and German explorers managed to get to the Temple Mount and survey below the surface. Two of my colleagues, Professor Shimon Gibson and Professor David Jacobson, collected all that information into one book, like that. That's it. And we have a lot of findings around the Temple Mount. So one interesting finding that was found, of course, in a secondary use is this thing. This is an inscription Once it was on the Temple Mount, it was found outside the Temple Mount as part of a later construction. I think it was part of the wall. And if you see, it has Greek inscription. Now, this inscription has a very interesting function, or had very interesting function. If I translate it, to say something like, no stranger is to enter within the balustrade, round the temple and enclosure. Whoever is caught will be responsible to himself for his death, which will ensue. So basically, this was an inscription around the most sacred area. Remember in Mishnah it says that people who are not Jewish, pagans, should not enter inside. And Josephus, by the way, tells us that there were inscriptions like that in Latin and Greek, and we have one of these inscriptions. So if you are a non-Jewish person and you get to Jerusalem before 70 CE and you see this inscription on a fence, you'll think twice before you go beyond this fence. Why would you like to go inside? Well, a lot of people were curious. What's going on in this temple? What's going on? Why do they have the Hall of Holiness, which is, people say that it's empty. It cannot be. So the temple attracts a lot of attention, and of course a lot of people try to sneak inside. And we have this inscription. We have, by the way, another inscription partially like that. We assume that there were many others, but of course they didn't survive. Alright, this is how the Temple Mount looked like before 70 CE. We are looking from west, from southwest. The temple is here, and this is the main street of Jerusalem. Remember the pilgrims, the pilgrim complex? That's over here. So, yeah, I can get this. And if you come to visit the archaeological excavations today around the Temple Mount, you'll see something like that. So this is the street that the archaeologists exposed. Oh, you already saw it. Okay, wonderful. So why? Please speak up. So I'm not going to repeat all the great guidance that I'm sure you'll hear it from your guide.
No, it's not to repeat.
What is interesting to remember that we have a paved street. You can see that the paved street is much below the surface today. So Professor Ronnie Reich was responsible in these excavations. They had to go down 16 meters. 16 meters. Then what they found is this paved street, which was in Jerusalem before it destroyed. So if Jesus was in Jerusalem, as any other pilgrim, he had to walk on Jerusalem's Broadway, over here. And you can see that something happened to the pavement. And you see the debris. So over here was an arch. You can see it here. It collapsed on the street. It collapsed when Romans took over Jerusalem. And these are the results. So today, when you walk between the debris, between the rocks, you should remember that when it was the biggest center of the Jewish nation, everything was on top. It was part of constructions above the street. And of course, we also have some small findings. We have stone vessels. Stone vessels are very unique because according to the Jewish tradition, they don't transfer impurity. So, of course, for religious purposes, they were very, very important. And we also have a lot of mikvaot, a lot of ritual baths, because each pilgrim who wanted to attend the temple had before he went up to go through purification, and he would do it through a mikveh. We spoke about mikvahs, right? Okay. So let's go a bit forward. We are looking on the Temple Mount from the south, from the city of David. By the way, the ancient Jerusalem, Jerusalem of the first temple, Jerusalem that King David conquered, basically was here. Then it started to expand to the north and to the west. Basically what you can see here is that there is a big ascent from this area of the Siloam pool, if you go to Temple Mount. And many pilgrims actually took this route because over here was a pool. This pool, part of my doctoral dissertation, it contained spring water, natural water. And as you already understood, Jerusalem in that period thinks a lot about purity. People who are impure can't stand the temple. So if you have water that has higher degree of purity than normal water in a regular mikveh, it's very important. So a lot of pilgrims would come here, purify themselves, and then ascend to the city. Let's see a bit how it looked like. This is a reconstruction. I know if maybe you saw part of it that is in Davidson Center. So here we are walking up. You can see that the street has steps. Did you see it yesterday?
We saw the film, we didn't go to the
All right, yeah. Here we are. Of course, you can appreciate how magnificent a holy place looks like when it is at higher altitude. We are arriving to the main street, and you can see this arch. Remember, we saw the debris. So this arch was one of the access points to the Temple Mount. Of course, at the bottom we have the street. There's a lot of commercial activity going on here. At the same time, people are walking up on the arch, and it's like first interchange that we have on highways, right, today. Let's jump a bit forward because it's quite a long movie. Oh, excuse me.
We didn't go to the steps.
Yeah.
We didn't.
I just want to, because we don't have enough time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do we know about the Temple Mount below the surface? We know that there are a lot of cisterns. There are about 40 cisterns, a bit less, and it means that there is a big deal of storing water. Unfortunately, these cisterns, most of them were not accessed since the 19th century. But we do know a lot about them due to explorers of Jerusalem from the 19th century. Some of them came from England, and just half a year ago I organized a conference about these explorers came from Palestine Exploration Fund. I encourage you to search for a paper published in Jerusalem Post. It's called Archaeologists Reveal Secrets of Their Past, when we collected different impressions on the work of the 19th century archaeologists. Now, this is how the Dome of the Rock looks like. Dome of the Rock, it has a dome, it has the rock itself, and around it we have this corridor. So the Dome of the Rock is important because, according to Muslim tradition, Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from this stone. Ascended to heaven, met with Allah, and got the important commandment for Muslims to pray 5 times a day. For the Jewish tradition, it is the Holy of Holiness. So as you can understand, it all gets very, very, very tense in this regard. And here I would like to come to the modern reality. This is the map of the old city today. You can see the Temple Mount, 1/6 of the territory of the old city. It has many gates, but only one gate is open for non-Muslims. In other words, if you're a Muslim, you can come to each one of these gates, say hello, I'm Muslim. They'll ask you to prove it. You probably have to say from memory part of the Quran, and you'll be allowed in. If you are not Muslim, a tourist, Jewish, a Christian, no matter what, you have to go through this gate only in certain hours, usually in the morning from 7:30 to 11, then 1 hour in the noon, and that's it. And you can go on Friday, you can go on Saturday. Why? So the idea is like that. Of course, everything here is very, very, very sensitive. Now, when Israel took control over the old city, one of the most important issues for the Israeli government was to ensure the safety of the holy sites for all the religions. In other words, since 1967, Israel basically that got control of the old city allows free practicing of all the religions in this place. Now we have Christian holy sites, we have Jewish holy sites, we have Muslim holy sites, and all of them in this small territory of the old city of 1 square kilometer. So that's not an easy task. The solution that was exercised by the government, that the Temple Mount is considered for the terms of management as a Muslim holy site. So it's true that Jews have history there, and it's also a Jewish holy site in terms of religion. It's true that Christians also have history. Remember, Jesus visiting the temple, Jesus teaching in the temple. But I would say, as a policy, the government decided that the management will be by the Muslims, because the Muslims have the most important holy constructions today on the surface of the Temple Mount. And the tourists are allowed to enter the Temple Mount outside the Muslim praying hours, and in such way that will ensure that only Muslim worshipping will be in practice on the Temple Mount. It means, if you are tomorrow going to Temple Mount, and you do, please make sure that you don't bring Bibles, you don't bring any praying books, nor psalms, nothing like that. Please don't bring also any religious symbols. Even sometimes earrings is a problem. Because over here at this gate, you'll be searched by the police to make sure that you don't enter with any religious artifacts that are not Muslim artifacts. This is how it looks like. That's why we usually have a very long line. And that's why I usually advise people that want to visit Temple Mount to go and do that in the morning, because you might spend a lot of time in that line. And then when you go up, you go through a bridge. It's a temporal bridge that there was a constant passage, but it collapsed several years ago. And as you can understand, to build anything new in this place is very, very, very sensitive. So till now they couldn't reach a compromise with the Muslim authorities and with the Jordanians that are in charge of the Muslim authorities in order to build a new passage. So right now they still have only a wooden passage. The old one collapsed during heavy rains. And you pass just above the a Western Wall Plaza where the Jews come for services. And that's how it looked like. And then eventually you imagine the Temple Mount. So just to make you understand that the site in very big proximity. The Western Wall is the external Western Wall of the Temple Mount. So just few meters, few feet above you, that's a place that is managed by the Muslim Waqf. And of course, sometimes it's create tensions. So sometimes when they have riots during the Muslim services, we do experience that they used to throw rocks down on people who pray here. And then in this case, the police have to intervene, and then all the cameras come because that's how the fun starts, right? And that's how you see the report in the press. All right, I have a few minutes, right?
This is important.
Yeah. 1999, Muslim Waqf decided that they have this unstable political situation and a lot of sensitivity, and Israel will not do anything. So they decided they're going to make illegal excavation in the Temple Mount. The purpose of these excavations was to create a praying hall, a new praying hall, underground hall for the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They needed it for the Ramadan, by the way, really needed it, because we speak about several 100,000 people who come to pray during the Ramadan Fridays at the Temple Mount. But the problem that they created this passage into that hall using heavy machines. Now, I came to speak with you after a day at Archaeological Dig. I'm right now involved as staff member of the Archaeological Dig in Horvat Midras. And today we started a new field, I would say new square, and from the morning till the end of the day we went down about, I would say, let's say 10 inches. Now, Temple Mount is the most important archaeological site in Israel, and I would like to take you back, 19th century. That's the only information we have about this site. So what we have here, when you dig it like that, is basically destruction of the cultural heritage. The Muslims carried their excavations several days until they were stopped, and the archaeologists could not do anything, because in order to intervene in the Temple Mount, there has to be an instruction from the Prime Minister's office. Eventually they went to the Supreme Court. A few colleagues of mine, Professor Gabi Barkai, and people who worked with him, and they managed to stop the works. Now, at that point, already huge part of the Temple Mount were excavated, not the right word to say, were thrown out. And when they were thrown out, they were put inside the areas. I have this picture called to the Temple Mount Sifting Project. They threw it outside of Mount, in the Kidron Valley, in a pit. And basically what my colleagues, Professor Gabi Barkai, Tzachi Dvira, and others started to do, what they were left to do, is basically take this dump and start sifting it. That's how the Temple Mount Sifting Project started. So, since I would say, I'm not sure when they had exactly started, but we are speaking about more than I would say 14 years working on this. They're sifting it every day. They still have some holy garbage from the Temple Mount. And the interesting thing is that they found a lot of, this is their website, you're most welcome to visit it. They have updates about what they're doing. So these are only a few findings that they found there. They have bulai. Bulai is a seal. It used to seal letters from the first temple period. They have coins. They have over 800 coins. This is one coin, it's half shekel coin from the time of the Jewish revolt, of the Great Revolt. They have 800 coins there, thrown out from the Temple Mount. Recently, they just published, this is my colleague Frankie Snyder from Boston, by the way, they published floors, opus sectilim, meaning floors that were Herodian floors on the Temple Mount, probably in one of the big constructions. And there were many, many, many other artifacts. Also, in the drainage, not connected to the Temple Mount itself, but in the drainage near the Temple Mount, they sifted this bell. This small bell was connected to the dressing, probably of the high priest. So, what I'm trying to say is that we do have a lot of artifacts from the Temple Mount, but unfortunately they are not in context. They were removed. And they're important because they do prove that in the first temple, second temple, and after it, there was history on the Temple Mount. But unfortunately, we cannot position it because it was taken out. So we don't know in which context, which buildings it belonged, and so on. And maybe the last thing I'd like to show you, this is very fresh. A few of my colleagues had a tour, archaeologists had a tour on the Temple Mount, and they were identified by the Waqf, by the Muslim custodians as archaeologists, and they were attacked. Police arrested several of the Waqf guards, and as far as I know, they're going to put charges. This is from August 2016. So this is one of the things going on. Here we got to the end. I hope we have a few minutes for questions, maybe.
Yes,
All right.
If the rock of the temple was the foundation of the universe, what about Genesis?
So, according to tradition, when God created the universe, that was the first rock that was created.